So this has been debated a lot. Actually, yeah, quite for a century. Did Paul have a strategy? And some people would say no. Now, I'm going to argue that I think he did, but not in the sense of a modern business or military documents composed of hundreds or thousands of pages with every detail planned out in advance. When we lived in Indonesia, I had a young man come to me with this big, huge, thick, printed out book, and he wanted me to interpret it, translate. And I said, well, what are you doing with this? He says, well, my boss has it. And I said, who's your boss? He said, well, he's the vice president of the National Telecommunications Company. I said, this is an English it's a legal document. It's hundreds of pages long. Why does he want me to translate? He said, well, because they just signed this and my vice president didn't understand what they were signing. And I said, did the others? He says, well, he doesn't think so. But the big boss asked, does anybody need this translated from English into Indonesian? And all of them immediately, because that was embarrassing to be asked, they all said, oh, no, this is fine. So they signed a multi-million-dollar agreement. Not in that sense of hundreds of pages of, legalese, very, very, very detailed. No, Paul didn't have anything like that. He wasn't carrying around in his laptop, a 300-page design with maps, and no, nothing like that. Nothing like we would do in a big, multi-million-dollar marketing campaign or in a political campaign thinking about how to elect a governor or a senator of a particular state, where you plan out what cities you're going to be in, how you're going to do advertising. All of those are very, very detailed. Not like that. Paul didn't have anything like that. But the reality is, even in the military, they sit around doing this all the time, it's acknowledged that strategy gets you to the battle. And then after that, after the first 5 minutes, once the battle begins, you've got to have flexibility to react to the situation. You haven't thought through every possibility. You have to train your leaders in knowing how to respond to things as they come up. But you do have the sense of, here's why we're willing to fight. Here's where we hope to take, to do this kind of thing. So, not in the modern sense of a military or big political or business strategy, but Paul did have a plan. He did know what he was doing, and I think that I feel comfortable saying that that's a strategy. Now, several years ago when we lived in India, there was an article in a paper there. And this man, Ajay Sani, was writing about strategy and how many times people use it, and he felt like that they were using it for a lot of things that were smaller than actual strategy. So he begins to define it, and I find this to be one of the best definitions of strategy I've ever seen. So listen to what he includes. There's been a pervasive proclivity to use the word strategy rather loosely, to cover every jumble of aspirations, intentions, and often fantasies. But strategy has no meaning unless it incorporates a long-term perspective, a realistic and accurate assessment of the challenges, a clear definition of objectives, a quantified assessment and acquisition of resources required to secure such objectives, and the planned deployment of these resources within time frames imposed by the conflict. Crucially, if there is a fundamental disconnect between objectives, tactics, resources, and ground conditions, there is no strategy. I find that to be a very insightful description of what strategy ought to be, whether it's military, business, political, or mission. So, did Paul exhibit any of those elements? Did he have a long-term perspective? I think he did. Did he have a realistic assessment of the challenge? I think he certainly did. Did he have a clear definition of objectives? Seems like he had clarity on that to me. Assessment and acquisition of resources needed. He's actually doing that all the time. He's assessing and acquisitioning people resources, in some cases financial resources, a lot, all the way through his ministry. Does he have a planned deployment of resources? Yes, and he talks about this in a number of places. He'll talk about, I sent so-and-so over here, and I plan to send this team over here later on. He's thinking through deployment of people resources all the time. And is there awareness of time? Yes, he didn't have a distinct timeline in the sense that you've got till November the 3rd to accomplish this task, but he did have a sense of being pushed, that we've got to do this as quickly as we can. People are lost and dying. So I think there really was a sense of time, and it's one of the things that was really pushing Paul. So what might a mission strategy include? Well, we have to enter the location. We have to engage the people. We have to evangelize the listeners. We need to exhort the believers. We have to ecclesia, to bring about the church, to gather them. We have to equip the leaders. We have to encourage them as partners. We have to exit that location at some point, and then extend the relationships over time. Paul is doing all of those things in the book of Acts and in his letters. In fact, his letters are often actually related to one or more of these pieces of his approach to missions. Well, just as an example, a couple of years ago, the IMB had what they referred to as a limitless emphasis. That was the target cities with students, retirees, tent makers, church-supported people, IMB-supported people, short-termers, volunteers, etc., etc. As many people as they could probably get to a place. But in order for this to be an effective strategy, at least two major issues have to be addressed somehow. One, how will they all work together? Or are they just there working separately? It's not really a team. It doesn't seem like a strategy to me if they're just all there. So there has to be some means of giving guidance to their work together. And will they do what it takes to be effective? Because it's not just that you're there, but what are you there to do and what are you able to do? From my personal reflection of seeing missionaries and the effective missionaries through the years, here are the things that I've seen that make a big difference. And when all of these are in place, then you've got real potential of something extremely amazing taking place. One is there a clear sense of calling to the task. Paul certainly had that, and we should too. Is there cross-cultural expertise? I would say Paul had that, and that's something that we need to be working very hard to develop in our contemporary times. Are there godly relationships between the workers and the people in that area, among themselves, with the local believers? All of those relationships are really important, so this is really critical to the overall success of the mission. Are they teaching healthy doctrine? And certainly, I believe Paul was. I believe God was leading him, and he gives us so much doctrine that we're still using because it's trustworthy. But even today, we might find a partner that we really like, but when we listen to their doctrine, we're like, I can be friends with them, but I don't think I'll plant a church with them, if you know what I mean. And is there a strategic methodology? Paul has a strategic methodology in so many levels, and if there's no methodology, if we're just there, we're trying to stay busy and do good things, chances are we're not going to have the impact that we might if it was really carefully thought through and strategic. And then, it's certainly not least, even though it's last on this list, is there the spiritual power of the Holy Spirit. empowering the witnesses, striking the hearts of listeners, transforming new believers from within, pulling a church together into a spiritual body that gives him honor and glory. All of that is really the work of the Holy Spirit. And when all of these things are together, then I think you've got real potential of great effectiveness and impact. Paul's paradigm included all 6 of those. His life included them. And so we're going to look at his method of communicating the gospel, training believers, and planting churches like we talked about just a few minutes ago. And these fit into a larger strategy that was intentional, but also quite flexible. Yes, he could make changes as circumstances changed and as the Spirit led, but there still was this broader outline of where they're going. We will also see that Paul's methods and strategies fit into a larger paradigm of who God is and what Paul was called to do. Yes, I think Paul had a strategy. I think he used methods, and he probably had some very effective tools. So all of these things, I think, are very meaningful to us. We ought to be watching. We ought to be reading and listening carefully, and then realize what are some things that we personally should be involved in developing, and better plans, better ideas about deploying or evangelizing, all those kinds of things in terms of this broader sense of mission methodology or mission strategy in light of Paul.